Bloomberg exclusive, and with me is Larry Fink, Chairman and Chief Executive of BlackRock. It's the world's largest asset management firm, responsible for around about $3.5 trillion. It also monitors around $9 trillion here as well, which we'll get to in a minute. But Lagarde on the hustings, trying to get a backing of the Brazilians when it comes to the IMF. Do you think she's a capable runner?
Yeah, Christine is a very capable banker, but I think we've seen the French play that role for many times now. I think through a process in which we are looking at many candidates. The central banker from Mexico is a very strong candidate. The finance minister from Thailand is an incredibly strong candidate. So we have many qualified candidates. There should be a process. I think they said they're going to try to find a conclusion to the process at the end of June. So in the next 30 days, we're going to see who comes from this.